I hadn't seen Evan in almost 5 years, and the first thing he said when I walked through the door was, "Damn, you got taller." He was standing barefoot in the kitchen of his family's lake house, holding a beer and wearing swim trunks like it was just another Saturday. He looked the same, still had that cocky smile, the sun-bleached hair from surfing, and that lazy confidence that made people forgive him for being kind of a jerk in high school. I think he just got shorter. I shot back. He laughed and pulled me into a quick hug, clapping me on the back like we were still 15. For a second, I froze. Then I hugged him back. It had been my mom's idea to come stay with my aunt's family for a few days over break. "You need a change of scenery," she'd said. "Get some fresh air. Evan's home from college, too. You guys used to be inseparable." "Yeah, when we were kids. Before puberty. Before I figured out I liked guys and realized my cousin was exactly the type that made my head spin. Evan was the classic golden boy. Straight as hell. Popular, athletic, the kind of guy who probably thought experimenting was something you did in chemistry class. So no, I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of spending a week with him. But then he opened the door that afternoon, and something in me shifted. The lake house was the same as I remembered. Big windows, old wood floors, that damp smell of sunscreen in summer. His parents were out for the week, which I hadn't expected. "Wait, it's just you?" I asked. "Yep. Mom and Dad left for a wedding thing. You good with that?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, sure." Evan led me to the guest room and flopped down on the edge of the bed while I dropped my bag. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "Chill, mostly. Grill, swim, maybe hit the trail if it's not blazing." "Oh, and I figured we'd have a couple nights where we get properly drunk." I snorted. "We?" He grinned. "You're not still a lightweight, are you? You're not still full of yourself, are you?" Evan laughed, stood, and stretched, his tanned stomach flashing for half a second. "You'll see." That night, we sat out on the dock with a cooler between us, passing beers back and forth like we were still 16 sneaking sips at family barbecues. Except this time, we were alone, legal, grown up. And Evan wasn't exactly keeping the conversation casual. "Do you ever think about how weird it is that we're cousins?" he asked, voice a little slurred, eyes on the dark water. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Like, I don't know. We're more like friends than family. I don't really think of you as my cousin." Thanks? I mean it in a good way," he said, nudging me with his shoulder. "You're just different. You've always been cool." "Okay," I said, wary now. "Where is this going?" Evan hesitated, drank, then turned and looked right at me. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Sure," I said slowly. He leaned back, resting on his elbows, staring up at the sky. "Have you ever done anything with a guy?" The question landed between us, like a thunderclap. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart started pounding. "Why are you asking?" Evan glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Just wondering." "Yeah," I said after a long pause. "I have." He nodded like he'd expected that. Didn't flinch. Didn't laugh. And then he said, "I haven't, but I've thought about it." I stared at him. "What?" He looked away. Not in like a big way. Just, I don't know, curiosity, I guess. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I thought you were, like, aggressively straight." I said before I could stop myself. Evan laughed quietly. "I still like girls. A lot. But sometimes I wonder what it'd be like to try something different." I didn't know what to say. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to change the subject. But I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. He turned to look at me again, and his voice was softer this time. "Because you're the only person I'd trust with it. And if I ever did try something, I'd want it to be with someone who actually knows what they're doing." My pulse was in my throat now. "Evan." He sat up, leaned in a little closer. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. Not if it's weird, but if it's not weird, maybe you could show me what it's like. The air was suddenly too heavy. My hands were trembling, and I wasn't sure if it was from adrenaline or fear or something worse. Want. He was my cousin, but he was also Evan, and now he was looking at me in a way I'd never thought he would. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, Evan, sitting on the dock, the reflection of moonlight glimmering in his beer bottle, the look in his eyes when he said he'd thought about it. That calm, almost matter-of-fact tone that somehow made it worse, because it wasn't a joke. It wasn't some drunk comment to laugh off. He'd meant it, and he'd meant me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of crickets outside, the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock. The air felt too warm, too heavy. Every time I started to drift off, I'd replay that moment, him turning toward me, his voice lowering, the way he'd said, "Maybe you could show me." By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just drunk talk, something he'd probably already forgotten. But when I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, barefoot, shirtless, hair still wet from a swim. He looked up from his phone, grinned like nothing was weird. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready." I nodded, forcing a small smile, trying to ignore the way his abs flexed when he leaned on the counter. "Thanks." We didn't talk about the night before. We ate breakfast, made fun of each other's playlists, and later went for a swim in the lake. It was like we'd silently agreed to pretend it never happened. But the more normal he acted, the more it messed with my head. After lunch, he suggested we take the kayak out. "It's too hot to just sit around," he said, tossing me a life jacket. I followed him down to the dock, trying not to stare at the drops of water sliding down his back as he pushed the kayak into the lake. We paddled for about half an hour before stopping near the middle of the water, letting the current drift us. It was quiet, just the soft creak of the kayak and the chirp of birds in the trees. Evan leaned back, squinting at the sun. "You ever notice how being out here makes everything else seem small?" I glanced at him. "That's surprisingly deep for you." He laughed. "Yeah, don't get used to it." Then, after a pause, "So, about last night?" My stomach tightened. "I figured we weren't talking about that." He looked over, his paddle resting on his knees. "I was drunk, yeah. But I wasn't lying." I swallowed hard. "Evan, I just..." He ran a hand through his hair, water droplets catching the light. "It's not like I've been thinking about guys or anything. It's just, I've been wondering what it's like. The whole connection thing, you know?" "Connection?" I echoed, half laughing. "That's what you're calling it?" He smirked. "I'm trying to sound mature, okay?" The smirk faded, replaced by something quieter. "I don't know. You've always been easy to talk to. You don't make me feel weird about stuff. So when I said I'd trust you, I meant that." I exhaled slowly, staring at the ripples spreading out from the kayak. My heart was beating too fast. "You realize how insane this sounds, right?" "Yeah," he said softly. "But I also know I've been thinking about it since I said it." The words hit me like a wave. We drifted for a while longer, both quiet. The sun hung high above us, turning the lake into a sheet of gold. When he finally paddled us back to shore, neither of us said another word. Later, back inside, we showered and changed. He threw on gym shorts and a loose tank, and I tried not to notice how good he looked in that lazy, effortless way. We made dinner together, burgers and fries, talking about random things, movies, people from school, stupid memories. The more we talked, the more normal it felt again, until the power flickered. The storm rolled in fast, dark clouds swallowing the sky, thunder rumbling in the distance. The rain started suddenly, pelting the windows in heavy bursts. Evan laughed as the lights blinked out completely, plunging us into near darkness. "Great," he said. "Romantic dinner by candlelight with my cousin. Just what I wanted." I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and tossed it to him. You're hilarious. We lit a couple candles and sat at the table, half in shadow. The storm was louder now, rain hammering the roof. Evan was quiet for a long time, spinning his fork between his fingers. You ever get tired of pretending you don't think about stuff? He asked suddenly. I looked up. What stuff? He gave a small, crooked smile. Like, the stuff you're not supposed to want. My pulse jumped. Evan! I'm not messing with you, he said quickly. I've been trying to figure things out lately, and I keep thinking maybe it's okay to just want something without knowing what it means yet. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. The candlelight flickered across his face, throwing shadows that made his eyes look darker. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. I didn't mean to make it weird, he said after a moment. Forget it. He stood, scraping his chair back, but I reached out and grabbed his wrist before I even knew what I was doing. Evan, wait. He stopped, looked down at my hand on his arm, then at me. What are you doing? He asked quietly. I let go, shaking my head. I don't know. His eyes searched mine for a long moment. Then he said, almost in a whisper, You're not the only one who doesn't know. The silence between us stretched out, fragile and dangerous. Outside, thunder cracked, the kind that rattles the windows. Neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and rested his hand on mine. It wasn't much, just his fingers brushing my knuckles, but it felt like the world tilted. The thunder faded to a low rumble. The rain softened. And for a second, everything else disappeared. I didn't pull my hand away. I probably should have, but I didn't. His palm was warm, a little rough from years of sports and working with his hands, but there was this hesitancy in his touch that made my stomach tighten. Evan's thumb brushed against my skin once, like he was testing how far he could go. When I didn't move, he did it again, slower this time. You're shaking, he said quietly. Yeah, I breathed. So are you. He looked at me across the table, the candlelight flickering between us. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm, rain whispering against the windows. It should have been peaceful, but every muscle in my body was tense. I don't know what I'm doing, he said finally. I know, I whispered. He swallowed, looking down at our hands. It doesn't feel wrong. I thought it would, but it doesn't. I took a slow breath. It doesn't have to mean anything. He looked up, searching my face like he was trying to read what I wasn't saying. You mean like, just trying it? I nodded once. You said you wanted to experiment, right? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. We sat there for another long moment, just looking at each other. Then he pushed back his chair and stood up. Come here, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I stood, heart pounding. He stepped closer, his hand finding the back of my neck. For a second, I thought he might back out. His breath hitched, his eyes flicked toward the floor. But then he leaned in. It wasn't a big kiss, just a soft, careful brush of lips. Awkward and uncertain, the kind of kiss that feels like testing a live wire. But the second it happened, something in my chest cracked open. Evan pulled back almost immediately, eyes wide, breathing hard. Okay, he said, voice shaky. That was something. I didn't say anything. I was afraid if I did, it would break the moment. He ran a hand through his hair, laughing nervously. Jesus, I can't believe I just did that. Do you regret it? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked at me, and there was this flicker of confusion, like he hadn't figured that part out yet. I don't know, he admitted. It felt real. He took a step back, then another. The air between us felt charged, almost humming. I need a minute, he said, heading toward the hallway. I didn't try to stop him. He didn't come back out for a while. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen, the sound of rain filling the silence. My heart was still hammering, my lips still tingling from that tiny, impossible kiss. After maybe half an hour, I heard his door open down the hall. His footsteps paused, then slowly came closer. He stopped in the doorway of the living room, leaning on the frame, hair messy, eyes unreadable. "You still up?" "Couldn't sleep," I said quietly. He crossed the room, sitting on the couch beside me. Not close, but not far either. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I don't know what's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you." He let out a breath. "Feels like there is. Like I'm doing something I shouldn't." "Then why did you do it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to." We sat in silence again. The storm was lighter now, fading into a softer drizzle. The only light came from the window, a faint silver from the moon sneaking through the clouds. Evan turned toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When with guys, does it feel different?" I thought for a second. "Yeah," I said. "It's not better or worse. Just different. More honest, maybe." He nodded slowly, staring at his hands. "That's what I want to know. What it feels like to be that honest." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The way he said it, so quietly, like a confession, told me everything. When he looked up, there was this raw vulnerability in his eyes I'd never seen before. He reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand on my knee. "I don't know what this means," he said softly. "You don't have to." He leaned in again, closer this time. When our lips met, it wasn't hesitant anymore. It was slow. Sure. Deliberate. His hand moved to the back of my neck again, fingers threading through my hair. I felt the tension melt out of me, replaced by something warm and steady. When we finally pulled apart, he exhaled, shaking his head slightly, smiling in disbelief. "You're gonna mess me up, you know that?" I laughed quietly. "Pretty sure you're already halfway there." He grinned, that old, crooked grin that had driven me crazy since we were teenagers. But there was something softer behind it now. He sat back against the couch, stretching his arms behind his head. "So what now?" I looked at him, trying not to overthink it. Now we stopped thinking about it for a bit. Evan chuckled. "You're good at that?" "Not even close," I admitted. He smiled and tilted his head toward the hallway. "You staying up or going to bed?" "Bed," I said. "If I can." He stood, ruffling his hair, that grin still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Night, Jake." "Night, Evan." When he disappeared down the hall, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I didn't know where any of this was going. All I knew was that a line had been crossed, and neither of us seemed all that interested in going back. The next morning, everything looked too normal for what had happened the night before. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching the steam rising from the coffee pot. The lake outside was calm again, the kind of stillness that almost looked fake. For a second, I wondered if I dreamed the whole thing. The candlelight, his hand on mine, the kiss. But then Evan walked in. He was wearing a white t-shirt that clung to his chest, his hair still damp from a shower, and when he saw me, his mouth twitched like he wasn't sure whether to smile or pretend nothing had happened. "Morning," he said finally, voice low. "Morning." He poured himself coffee, and the clink of the spoon against the mug sounded deafening in the quiet kitchen. I cleared my throat. "Sleep okay?" He smirked faintly, eyes still on his cup. "Not really. Too much going on in my head." "Yeah," I said. "Same." We stood there for a minute, both pretending to focus on our coffee, neither brave enough to look directly at the other. Finally, Evan leaned against the counter and said, "So about last night." Here it was. The moment. I braced myself for him to backtrack, to say he'd been drunk, confused, that it didn't mean anything. But he didn't. He stared at the floor, his fingers tapping the mug. I keep thinking about it. I thought I'd wake up feeling weird, but I don't. That freaks me out more than anything. I nodded slowly. You don't have to figure it all out in one day. I know, he sighed, finally meeting my eyes. I just don't want to screw things up between us. You're not, I said softly. Unless you stop talking to me. That'd be the only thing that screws it up. He studied me for a second, then gave a small, relieved smile. Okay, good. We finished breakfast in relative silence, but that quiet felt less heavy now, like we both knew there was something unspoken between us, and we're just waiting to see what would happen next. That afternoon, we decided to hike one of the trails that wound around the lake. It was something to do, and the air after the storm was fresh and cool, full of that earthy smell of wet pine. We started off joking, shoving each other like kids again. For a while, it felt easy, familiar. But when we reached the clearing that overlooked the water, things got quiet again. Evan dropped his backpack and sat on a fallen log, looking out at the lake. I used to come up here all the time when I needed to clear my head, he said. Still works? He shrugged. Usually. I sat next to him, close enough that our knees brushed. He didn't move away. I keep trying to remember when I started thinking about this stuff, he said. You know, about guys. It's not like there was one moment where it clicked. It just kind of snuck up on me. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. I dated this girl last semester, he continued. Everything was fine, but I don't know. Sometimes when she touched me, I'd feel nothing. Then, I'd see some guy at the gym, and it'd hit me out of nowhere. I'd tell myself it was nothing, but it kept happening. He laughed nervously. And then last night happened, and now I don't know what to think. I picked at the edge of my shoe, unsure what to say. You don't have to label it, you know. You don't owe anyone that. He nodded. Yeah, but I owe it to myself, to be honest. I think that's what scares me the most. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a while we just sat there, both watching the sunlight ripple across the water. Then he said quietly, Do you ever think maybe we met in the wrong order? I frowned. What do you mean? He smiled a little. Like, if we weren't cousins. If we just met somewhere, college, a party, whatever, you think we'd still get along like this? I laughed softly. Maybe. You'd probably still annoy me. His smile faded into something more thoughtful. Yeah, but you wouldn't have stopped me last night. That made my chest tighten. I turned toward him. I didn't stop you. He met my gaze, and for a second, neither of us breathed. His eyes flicked down to my mouth and then back up. Right, he murmured. You didn't. The way he said it sent a pulse of heat through me, and before I could think better of it, I leaned in and kissed him. He kissed me back immediately. No hesitation this time. His hand came up to the side of my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. It was soft at first, then deeper, hungrier. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. Still doesn't feel wrong, he whispered. No, I said, voice barely audible. It doesn't. We stayed like that for a few more seconds, breathing in sync, before he pulled back and looked at me with a small, almost disbelieving grin. You know, I thought coming up here was just going to be about swimming and beers. Yeah, this isn't exactly that, he chuckled and leaned back, running a hand through his hair. You're messing with my head, man. I smiled faintly. You started it, he laughed, shaking his head. Fair. The walk back was quiet but charged, like every step carried a new kind of awareness. By the time we got to the house, the sun was dipping behind the trees. He grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge and handed me one. 2 weird days, he said, raising his bottle. I clinked mine against his. To not overthinking, he smirked. Good luck with that. We drank in silence for a while, sitting on the porch, watching the last light fade from the lake. His arm brushed mine once, then again. He didn't move away. Neither did I, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Whatever this was becoming, it was real. That night, the air in the house felt different. Quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from calm. It was charged, alive, humming with something unspoken. After dinner, Evan suggested a movie. It sounded safe enough, ordinary enough, like we were both trying to wrap ourselves back in something familiar. He picked an old action flick from his childhood collection, something we'd watched a dozen times before. He sprawled out on the couch, one leg tucked under him, the other stretched out, his foot brushing my thigh. I told myself it was accidental. It probably wasn't. Halfway through the movie, he reached for the remote and lowered the volume until it was just background noise. "You ever notice how every guy in these movies has the same face?" he asked, grinning lazily. "Yeah, square jaw, no emotions, permanent 5 o'clock shadow," I said. He laughed. "Exactly." He turned toward me, his face lit faintly by the TV's glow. "You've got that kind of jaw now, you know," I snorted, pretending to focus on the screen. "Yeah, sure. I'm serious," he said, leaning in a little. "You used to look like such a kid. Now you look like—" He trailed off, his voice dropping. "I don't know. Not a kid." The words hit harder than they should have. My heart started thudding again. "Evan," I said quietly, "you're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Making this confusing." He smiled faintly, but it was softer now. "I'm not trying to confuse you." "Then what are you trying to do?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "Figure myself out, and I can't do that if I keep pretending last night didn't happen." The silence that followed felt like gravity. Heavy, pulling us closer whether we wanted it or not. The movie played on, meaningless noise now. Evan's fingers drummed lightly against his thigh, inches from my hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand over and let his fingers brush mine. I didn't move. Neither of us did. We stayed like that, half touching, for what felt like forever, the space between us shrinking one heartbeat at a time. Then he whispered, "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah. When you kissed me up on the trail, was that real? Or were you just trying to see what I'd do?" "It was real," I said, barely breathing. He nodded, eyes fixed on our hands. "Okay." The word hung there a second too long before he said, "Then do it again." I didn't think. I just moved. The kiss was deeper this time, steadier. He met me halfway, like he'd been waiting for the signal. His hand slid up to my jaw, his thumb brushing the edge of my mouth as if he needed to memorize the shape of it. When we finally broke apart, his eyes were wide and bright. "Okay," he whispered again, almost laughing in disbelief. Yeah, I echoed. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You know, I thought it'd feel wrong. I thought I'd freak out. But it's just—" He exhaled, shaking his head. "It's just you." The simplicity of that hit me harder than I expected. We sat there in silence, the faint sound of rain beginning again outside. He shifted closer, the side of his body pressed against mine. It wasn't cautious anymore. It was comfortable. "Does this make us completely insane?" he asked quietly. "Probably," I said. "But I think we passed that line yesterday." He laughed, that low, familiar sound that always came from deep in his chest. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," I said, "but it doesn't have to be impossible." He studied me for a long time, his expression caught somewhere between relief and confusion. Then he reached up and touched the side of my face again, thumb brushing the spot where my pulse hammered beneath the skin. "I don't know what happens after this," he admitted. "You don't have to know," I said. "You just have to be honest." He nodded, letting his hand fall. "I can do that." For a while, neither of us moved. The movie ended, credits rolling unnoticed across the screen. The only light left in the room came from the soft blue glow of the TV and the flash of distant lightning beyond the windows. Evan turned off the screen and stood, stretching, his shirt riding up just enough to show the faint line of his stomach. "I should get some sleep," he said, his tone deliberately neutral. "Yeah," I said, standing too. "Good idea." But neither of us moved toward our rooms. We stood there for a few seconds, facing each other, the distance between us barely a breath. His eyes dropped to my mouth again, and for a second I thought he was going to lean in, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Night, Jake," and walked down the hall. The sound of his door closing echoed in my chest. I didn't sleep right away. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house, the distant roll of thunder fading into silence. Every nerve in my body felt alive, like the air itself had shifted. Sometime after midnight, I heard soft footsteps in the hall. My door creaked open. Evan stood there, silhouetted by the faint light from the kitchen. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long moment, then stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No." Kept thinking. "About what?" He hesitated, then came closer, sitting on the edge of my bed. "About how I didn't want to walk away earlier, and how it scared the hell out of me that I didn't." I sat up, my heart hammering. "You don't have to be scared." "I know," he said. Then, with a small, nervous smile, "But I kind of am anyway." He leaned forward, and I met him halfway again. The kiss was slower this time, deliberate, careful, like he wanted to learn it piece by piece. His hands trembled slightly where they rested on my shoulders, but the longer it went on, the steadier he became. When he finally pulled back, he whispered, "This still doesn't feel wrong." "No," I said. "It doesn't." He exhaled, a quiet laugh breaking the tension. "You realize this is going to make going back to normal impossible, right?" "Yeah," I said. "But maybe that's okay." He smiled. Small, genuine, a little scared. "Yeah, maybe it is." Morning came in a haze of half-sleep and heartbeat. When I finally woke, light was spilling across the sheets, and Evan was gone. The spot where he'd sat on the edge of the bed was still warm, a small dent in the blanket proof that the night hadn't been some dream. I lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling. Every instinct in me wanted to overanalyze everything we'd said, every glance, every breath. But another part, the quieter, steadier part, just wanted to let the morning exist without turning it into a verdict. Down the hall, I heard pans clatter. Bacon. The smell drifted toward my room, greasy and familiar. I took a long breath, pulled on a t-shirt, and went to the kitchen. Evan was at the stove, hair messy, wearing the same sweatpants from last night. When he turned and saw me, he grinned sheepishly. "Morning." I figured the least I could do was breakfast. "Trying to bribe me with food?" I asked, sitting at the counter. "Maybe," he said, flipping the bacon. "You like eggs, right?" "Yeah." "Cool." He moved around the kitchen like nothing monumental had happened between us, but his shoulders were a little tighter than usual, and when he set a plate in front of me, our fingers brushed and both of us froze for half a second longer than necessary. We ate in relative silence, forks clinking, the quiet hum of the fridge filling the space between words neither of us knew how to start. After a few minutes, he said, "I was thinking of taking the boat out later. Want to come?" "Sure," I said, grateful for the normal-sounding plan. The lake looked glassy and perfect, reflecting the blue sky like a mirror. We pushed off from the dock, the old motor coughing once before catching. Evan sat at the wheel, squinting against the sun, the wind whipping through his hair. For a while, we didn't talk. We just let the boat glide across the open water. It felt easy again, almost like before. Then he cut the engine near the center of the lake, letting us drift. He turned to me, resting an arm on the side rail. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "Last night," he started, then shook his head. "No, never mind." "Say it." He sighed. "When I came into your room, were you expecting it? Like, did you know I'd show up?" I shook my head. "No, but I wasn't surprised either." "Why not?" "Because you don't hide things well," I said with a small smile. He laughed softly, the sound swallowed by the open air. "Yeah, I guess not." Then, quieter, "I don't regret it, you know." That made me look at him. He met my eyes. Steady this time, not searching for reassurance. I don't regret it either, I said. We sat there for a long time, just drifting, the water slapping softly against the hull. Back at the house, the afternoon heat pressed down on everything. We showered, grabbed beers, and ended up on the porch again. Evan leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, eyes half closed against the light. "Feels weird?" he said suddenly. "Not bad weird, just new." "Yeah, I keep waiting for it to hit me, you know? The guilt, the panic." "Hasn't yet?" He shook his head. "No, just this. Calm. Which almost makes me panic more." I laughed quietly. "You think too much," says the guy who stares at the ceiling for hours, he said, grinning. He wasn't wrong. After a moment, his expression softened. "I don't want to mess this up, whatever this is." I took a sip of beer, considering my words. "You won't. Just don't make promises you can't keep." He looked at me. "What if I want to keep them?" "Then make sure you mean them." He nodded, gaze drifting back toward the lake. "I mean it," he said finally. "At least right now, I do." Evening came slow. The air turned cooler, the lights softer. We grilled dinner, sat outside with our plates balanced on our knees. It almost felt domestic, in a strange, fragile way. Evan finished his beer, set the bottle down, and stared out over the water. "Do you think this is just a phase?" "What do you mean?" "Me! Doing this, with you." I looked at him for a long time. "Do you want it to be?" He didn't answer right away. "No," he said eventually, "but it'd be easier if it was." "Easier isn't always better." He gave a small, rueful laugh. "You sound like a fortune cookie." "Shut up," I said, smiling despite myself. He reached over and nudged my shoulder. "You know, you make it hard to think straight sometimes." "That's the point, isn't it?" he snorted. "Yeah, maybe it is." Later, after we'd cleaned up, he disappeared into his room for a while. I sat in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to pretend my stomach wasn't twisting with 100 different thoughts. When he came back, he was wearing a hoodie, hair damp from another shower. He stopped by the couch, watching me. "You heading to bed?" he asked. Eventually. He hesitated. "Mind if I sit?" I shrugged, scooting over. "It's your house." He dropped onto the couch beside me, close enough that our knees touched. We sat in silence for a minute, the sound of crickets filling the space. Then he said, "You know what's weird? This doesn't feel like I'm crossing a line anymore. It just feels normal." "Good kind of weird?" I asked. "Yeah." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Good kind of weird." He turned his head, eyes catching mine in the dim light. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "You?" He smiled faintly. "Getting there." For a while, neither of us spoke. His shoulder brushed mine. Slowly, he tilted his head until it rested against me, his breath steady. I didn't move. Didn't need to. We stayed that way until the clock ticked past midnight. When he finally stood, he looked down at me and said, "Night, Jake." "Night, Evan." And when he left, I realized I wasn't scared of what was happening anymore. Whatever it was real. And for now, that was enough. By the next morning, something between us had shifted. Again. But this time in a way that felt settled. Not that we had answers, or a plan, or even the right words. But there was a rhythm now. A quiet understanding. The way Evan smiled a little longer when he saw me. The way he brushed my shoulder when he passed behind me in the hallway. The way our conversations dipped into longer silences. Not awkward, just full of everything we weren't rushing to explain. We spent the day out on the water. He let me drive the boat, which he never used to do. We swam, roughhoused in the lake like we used to as kids, except now our hands lingered just a little too long when they brushed skin. We laughed a lot. Maybe more than we had all week. But under all of it, we both knew the clock was ticking. I was leaving the next day. Back to school. Back to real life. Back to where this, whatever this was wouldn't make sense. That night, he made pasta, dumping half a bottle of wine into the sauce because that's what they do on cooking shows. It turned out surprisingly good. We ate on the porch again, wrapped in hoodies against the cool air. After dinner, we stayed out there, neither of us reaching for our phones, just sitting with the silence and the sound of wind in the trees. He looked over at me at one point and said, "I've been trying to come up with some big speech, something smart, meaningful." I smiled. "That's not really your style." He laughed, nudged my leg with his foot. "Yeah, I suck at the deep stuff." "You don't," I said. "You just think you do." He was quiet for a second. "Then, I don't know what's going to happen next when you leave." "Neither do I." He stared out over the lake, chewing his bottom lip. "I'm scared I'll go back to pretending, like this didn't happen." "You don't have to pretend," I said gently. "Not with me." He turned to face me, and something in his expression cracked. "I don't want to lose you, Jake." "You're not going to. You don't know that." I leaned in, resting my hand on his knee. "Evan, look at me." He did. His eyes were shining just a little. Not tears, but close. "This wasn't a mistake," I said. "No matter what happens next, it mattered. And we both know it." He nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, we do." Then he exhaled slowly, reaching up to cup the side of my face. "Come to my room tonight." It wasn't a question. And it wasn't about closeness. It was something else. I nodded. Okay. His room smelled like cedar and clean laundry. He'd left the window cracked, and the night air drifted in, cool and fresh. We climbed into his bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. No games, no hesitation. He lay on his side, facing me, one hand tucked under his head. For a while, we just looked at each other in the dark. "Tell me something real," he whispered. "I used to have a crush on you when we were 16. He grinned in the dark. "I know." "What?" "I'm not lying, Jake. I just didn't know what to do with it." I groaned into my pillow. "God, that's embarrassing." "It's not." He moved a little closer, enough that our knees touched. "You were the first person who ever made me feel safe. Still are." I didn't know what to say to that, so I kissed him. Not out of want, but out of need. Out of that quiet ache that comes from knowing something good is going to end soon. He kissed me back, slow and deep, one hand sliding into my hair, the other resting on my side like he wasn't sure if he should pull me closer or hold still. Eventually, we just lay there, tangled up, our breathing in sync, his forehead against mine. "I don't want to wake up tomorrow," he murmured. "I know. Can't we just stay like this for a while longer?" "We can." And we did. I left the next morning. We didn't say anything heavy. No long goodbye, no promises. He helped me load my bag into the car, leaned against the door while I started the engine. Then he said, "Drive safe, and text me when you get back." I nodded. "I will." He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, something big, but instead he reached in, grabbed the back of my neck and kissed me hard. A quick, fierce kiss. Then he stepped back and smiled. "Later, Jake. Later." And I drove away. My hands were shaking the whole time. 3 weeks. That's how long it took before I saw him again. Not because I didn't want to. Not because he didn't. We texted almost every day. Just enough to feel connected, but not enough to dig into what really needed saying. It wasn't avoidance. Not exactly. It was more like waiting to see if it would still feel real when we weren't in the bubble of the lake house. When we were back in the world where he was Evan, the straight cousin, and I was me, still figuring out what the hell to do with what we'd started. Then, out of nowhere, I got the text. "I'm near your campus this weekend. Want to meet up?" I stared at it for a solid 5 minutes. Not because I didn't know my answer. I did. But because something in my chest started thrumming the second I read his name again, I replied, "Yeah, when?" "Saturday, afternoon, coffee?" Simple. Neutral. But we both knew it wasn't just coffee. I got there early and picked the table near the window. It was a small off-campus cafe where nobody cared if you sat for hours with one drink. I was sipping an iced latte I barely tasted when he walked in. Same old Evan. Hoodie, jeans, that casual way he moved like the world always had room for him. But when his eyes found mine, there was something different. Softer, maybe a little nervous. He slid into the seat across from me. Hey, I said, and suddenly I wasn't breathing right. He looked me over for a second, like he was checking to see if I was still the same person he left behind on that porch. I almost didn't come, he said. I almost didn't believe you would. We both smiled, tight, unsure. Then he leaned forward a little. I've been thinking about what you said. At the lake. About not pretending. I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. I wrote that for myself the night I got back, just stuff I didn't know how to say out loud. I stared at it, then looked up at him. You want me to read this now? He shook his head. Later. Or never. But I needed you to have it. We sat in silence for a minute. Then I said, So, what do you want, Evan? He looked down at his hands, flexed them once like he was working up to something. I want to stop being afraid of how I feel. I want to stop treating what happened like a fluke. And I want to be able to look at you without feeling like I'm about to screw everything up. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. He finally met my eyes. I don't have all the answers, Jake. I'm still figuring it out. But I know this. When I was with you, I felt more like myself than I have in years. And I want to keep feeling that way. I felt something catch in my throat. You're serious? He nodded. Dead serious. I let that settle. Let the air between us fill with the weight of what he was saying. Then I leaned forward. Okay? Yeah, I said. Let's figure it out. We didn't label it. We didn't rush. We didn't make some grand public declaration. That wasn't us. Instead, Evan came to visit more often. We had movie nights in my dorm, long walks around campus, late-night drives with music up too loud. Sometimes we held hands. Sometimes we didn't. But it always felt right. He told me about the conversations he was having, with friends, even his parents eventually. Some were easy, some were not. But he didn't hide anymore, and neither did I. We still made fun of each other, still argued about dumb stuff, still laughed until our stomachs hurt. But there was something new underneath it all now, a quiet kind of love, one that didn't need a name to be real. A few months later, we were back at the lake house for a long weekend. Same porch, same view. Evan sat next to me, fingers laced with mine, our legs stretched out, beers in hand. He looked over and said, You know, I used to think this place was just about escaping stuff. Yeah? He nodded. Now I think it's where I finally stopped running. I looked at him, the way the light caught his eyes, the way his thumb moved gently over my hand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath.